Video games, timeless if you ask me, but you know what's even more timeless? Hating stuff. People have been hating things as long as there's been things to hate, like video games. But hold on a second. I thought people loved video games. Well, I sure do, and I know that a lot of you do as well. You know what I hate? People hating stuff, but that would mean I hate myself. As strange as it might sound, people can actually get enjoyment from games they hate. Maybe not playing them, but talking about hating them? Sure, heck, people can even bond with each other over their mutual hate for a certain game. A nice loving moment, if you will, and call it low-hanging fruit because video games can't really defend themselves, making them an easy target to bash. But saying you hate something that somebody loves within earshot of somebody who loves it, and those are fighting words. You say something bad about my beloved bananas, and I'll probably just respectfully disagree since I understand it's kind of a polarizing food with a strong taste and smell. You're not eating your bananas underripe or overripe though, are you? They're no good that way. Anyways, I may not be the best example, but in any case, hating on a game will often catch the attention of those who love it. Hate a game and it'll make those who love it just love it all the more. And not just some of the more popular games like a Sonic the Hedgehog or Earthbound. In my last video, I made some jokes about Bayou Billy, and just like I expected, some fans were prompted to share their passion for the game. That's true love, folks. Lucky for me, they all seem to know I didn't actually hate the game, but in general, hating on a game can be a risky proposition. Hating a game can lead to somebody hating you for hating the game they love. That's your game they're talking about. What else is there to do? Nothing? Let me tell you, I stayed silent while my copy of Donkey Kong 64 was getting bashed one time instead of defending it. Really hurt its feelings. Now I'm ready to defend that game anytime, any place, even if I do still have some issues with it myself. So hating games, how did it all start? Well, as long as there's been games to play, there's been gamers to hate the certain games they don't like. Not that some people wouldn't just settle for simply not liking a game without the need to escalate things to hate. And while there were certainly rivalries between consoles before the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo, I'd say they were a soft launch compared to the console war that was Sega Genesis versus Super Nintendo. In my opinion, the greatest console war. What made this console rivalry stand out so much was not only that the consoles themselves and their game libraries were so different, but how the consoles were branded and marketed was very different too. For starters, Sega straight up went after Nintendo. At least here in North America they did, in large part by courtesy of Mr. Tom Kalinske, president and CEO of Sega of America in the early 90s. Sega tried to brand themselves as the cooler console, because what does anybody under the age of 18 care about? That's right, being cool and not much else. Funny how later in life the exact opposite can be true. Sega was pretty aggressive about going after Nintendo in their marketing and strategies, and while they didn't say everything they probably wanted to, you got the impression that if they could have, they would have just straight up said Nintendo sucks. But don't worry, the fans took care of saying that for them. And while Nintendo had more of a light-hearted Sega them dirty dogs attitude, you could tell they weren't fans of Sega either. So, naturally, with the spirit of this thing is better than that thing in the air, the stage was set for hate to enter the scene for those who owned either console. Without a console war, in theory, hate for games should have just been reserved for bad games, the rascal racers of the world. But with a rivalry, the possibility to hate games, even if they were good, simply because they were on the rival console, became very real and has been something we've seen with all console rivalries. Not to mention the inherent divisiveness between the fan bases, which breeds hate. But here's the thing, and this is going to be a big point I make throughout this video, This hate, it's fake, and is therefore what I like to call fake hate. And I'm not talking about the schoolyard crush kind of fake hate, where Billy likes Brittany but doesn't quite know how to show it, so he pretends to be mean. No, the fake hate I'm talking about, which actually also could have occurred on a playground, is where one person would pretend to hate somebody else because they owned either a Sega Genesis or Super Nintendo, whichever one they didn't have. But most of the time, they didn't actually hate them. That's passion for whichever console they owned getting redirected to other things. I mean, there you are with your Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis. Maybe it's the first game console you've ever owned, maybe not, but you love that thing. What could possibly make it any better? Well, how about convincing yourself that any rival consoles were not better than it? Which naturally leads to hating the other console and or whoever you know that might own it. I think it's no coincidence that hate often comes in the context of trying to elevate something else. You know what I like to think about though? When somebody is just sitting at home enjoying a video game by themselves, that is love. What's chosen to be done with those strong feelings away from that experience is where things can get hairy. But regardless of my belief that this hate comes from misguided passion, there's a couple pieces of evidence that have me believe this is fake hate as well. Okay, so you know how a lot of kids would only own one console back in the day? And if you weren't alive back then, I can tell ya, yeah, most kids only owned one console. It wasn't as common back then as it is nowadays, where because most of today's parents grew up with video games, instead of limiting the household to a single console, they say, screw this, I play video games too, so let's just get everything. But back then, for the kids who were lucky enough to have more than one console, like magic, they could suddenly see the merits of both consoles. Also, how many kids who swore by one console or another back in the day, who are still playing video games nowadays, as they should be, now play both the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis? I mean, that console war was decades ago. Your schoolyard rival Timmy you talked mad trash about the Genesis to will never know you're playing it now, just like he'll never know where his Mean Bean Machine cartridge went. Because here's the thing about people who like video games. They like video games. So even if it's a video game they think isn't the greatest, maybe kind of mediocre, or even just straight up bad, it does still have some sort of significance for simply being a video game. It's like soda for me as a kid. I loved soda, but would tell ya I hated grape soda. But if I was in a situation where I was allowed to have soda and grape soda was the only option, you bet your butt I was drinking that grape soda. And yeah, I definitely believe that people can dislike games to the point they would say they hate games, but I don't buy it as genuine hate. I mean, there's an underlying comedic nature to saying you hate a game most of the time, as evidenced by an entire subculture online based on bashing games. Saying you hate a video game is often just playful at most. Things like anxiety, traffic, moldy bread, or having your house burglarized, those are things that people hate. You know, things that really suck. The next type of fake hate I want to talk about has to do with multiplayer, and specifically competitive multiplayer. Whether it's on the couch with a couple people you know, or on the couch by yourself with a bunch of people you don't know playing online. The rage induced by multiplayer gaming has been well documented, to the point some people prefer to only play single-player experiences. I can understand that. Competition has a very natural way of leading towards hostility and hate. You want to beat somebody, but they're beating you, and that makes you hate them. Or, you know, like I've been saying, fake hating them. Yep, because as soon as they're on your team, you love them. Back in the Halo 2 online days, a game I was good at, I remember playing a match against somebody named Snicker Poops, who was kicking my butt. And even worse, kept playing the Shake That Laffy Taffy song into their microphone. There was nobody in the world I hated more. But then in the next match, Snicker Poops switched onto my team. The two of us started dominating, and now Now, I loved the Laffy Taffy song. Point is, people just get really competitive in these games and it starts to get personal. Not because they genuinely hate that person, but more so because they're really getting into the game. Doesn't mean it's appropriate, but that's what's happening. Okay, the last kind of hate I want to talk about has to do with who is and is not included in the hobby. Now, most of you are well aware of my stance on the subject, as I encourage people to get on the metaphorical lawn of retro gaming, and heck, while we're at it, gaming in general. And it's not just for the younger generations, but any type of potential gamer. I want people playing these games so they can thrive and live on. It gets me super excited to think there are people who love this hobby as much as I do, although you may be alright a notch or two below how much I love it. When people try to keep people out of the hobby or discourage them from being a part of it, well, that's a bummer. And again, I think it comes from misguided passion. Somebody loves gaming so much that they feel like if people aren't loving it in a way similar enough to how they are, then they should stay out for risk of it changing the hobby too much. To those people, I would just say to not worry about how other people are engaging in it so much. The popularity of video games is so massive and widespread by this point that there's room for everybody. Now, for the most part, when it comes to the comments on my channel, you all do a great job of being positive, but every once in a while, I'll get a bizarre comment out of nowhere from somebody who is really angry and specifically at me. What I do? It just doesn't come across as very believable. Sorry, fake hater, don't believe you. I think there's something else they're upset about being projected onto me, a pretty safe target. You can light me up in the comments and I'm not gonna do anything about it. I know you love games just as I do, and therefore you're still cool to me. For a lot of people who are into games, if you express that you also love games or would be interested in getting into them, they're going to react positively. Because here's the thing about being happy, people like it. And I'll never stop believing that anybody, given the opportunity, is going to have love for things. Can you imagine somebody after a satisfying gaming session sitting there and thinking, gosh, I wish I could hate things more? A lot of it comes down to what you're looking for. Look for love and positivity in this hobby, and there are places to find it. Look for negativity and hate, and where there's a will, there's a way for that one too. But that about does it for my thoughts. If that seemed a little too glass half full for you, sorry, but that's my style. Glass half full, and then see what we can do to try to top it off. Of course, I'm curious to hear all of your thoughts as well. No specific question, as I imagine everyone's thoughts could be all over the place for this one. So if a thought comes to mind, just go for it. So with that, leave a response down below, and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the retro bird, yeah, and he's talking about video games. He's the